Hey guys, it's Jenny. Alrighty, today we're gonna continue the series of explaining my orchid setup, and we will focus today on the pots that I used and all of the decorative containers. And we will only refer to orchids. I have other plants as well, but most of them are in normal pots, so no point in talking about them, but the orchids have different pots. Okay, so for the main part, I'm using clear plastic pots, especially created for orchids, such as these. They are transparent, and I have multiple brands, so there is a little bit of variation between them. This particular one is a Tekku brand, which is a very well-known brand to create these pots. It has a raised bottom and also an air cone. Originally, these pots did not have these extra ventilation holes. We'll talk about them and I'll show you how I make them a little later, but as a general idea, this is pretty much how a orchid intended pot looks like when you're gonna purchase it. Now, the pot that I just showed you is a medium-sized pot, but I have other sizes as well. So for example, this is yet again another orchid pot, but it is a much smaller size. This is not a Tekku brand. I'm not entirely sure what brand it is. I purchased it from an orchid nursery. We'll talk about where you can purchase them as well. But yet again, we can see that we have this air cone, which provides ventilation at the bottom of the pot. So standard orchid pots usually look like this. But I have some other pots as well. And this is the other type of pot that I have. As you can see, yet again, a transparent plastic pot. It has a lip, it is raised, but this one doesn't have an air cone. Really hard to show you, sorry. There we go. It has a flat bottom. Now, this pot was purchased from a home improvement store. I am not sure of the brand or if they specified any type of brand. It is an orchid intended pot, but it doesn't have that air cone. Now, the two pots that I showed you are a standard size, in my opinion, or a medium size. But between them, there is a little bit of a difference due to the different brand. So the Tekku one is a 13 centimeter pot, while the non-branded one is a 14 centimeter pot. The difference isn't big, but it's big enough to make me choose particular orchids for the bigger pot and other smaller orchids for the other pot. But there are also other sizes, smaller and bigger of course. And yet again, depending on the brand, they can look a little bit different. But here is an example of an orchid intended pot. This one, even though you might not see it, it does have an air cone. This one is a 10 centimeter pot, but of course you can go even lower than that, 8 centimeter pot and even 6 centimeter pot. And of course you can go bigger than the standard pot, and here I have a 15 centimeter pot. Now, a pot bigger than 15 centimeters is pretty hard to find. I think companies do produce pots bigger than this, but since they're not necessarily all that needed, we don't all have really big orchids. As I noticed, they're pretty hard to find. So the biggest plastic pot, which is transparent, in my collection is the 15 centimeter pot. A pot bigger than this I would only need for one orchid out of 200. So you can see why bigger pots are more rare than this one. Now, depending on your territory, orchid pots may or may not be found at your local flower shop or garden center. In recent years, it has become more popular, but if you somehow don't find it at your local stores, definitely you can find it on eBay, Amazon, orchid nurseries even. The problem is, it's a little bit expensive. So here is where we become a little creative. Now, I might be able to justify the price for the medium size and big size pots. Also, for me personally, it is pretty hard to find an equivalent that can take the place of those pots. However, with the tiny pots, which in my opinion do not justify their prices, we can definitely use one-time drinking cups. So these are some cups that I acquired from a supermarket. I have different shapes. This is one of them, and this is the other. And these are suited for tiny orchids, and I'll show you a few in a bit. But before I do that, when I choose a cup to use as a pot, I always look for the very sturdy plastic ones. This is a pretty thick plastic, as you can hear. It's not all that flexible, but on the market you can definitely find the very flimsy ones. I don't particularly enjoy those. I don't like the shape of them, so it is a bit of a struggle to find these things, but eventually I did find some supermarkets that carry them. So this is one of the tiny ones, and this is one of the more intermediate ones. It tends to have the same dimensions all over, but these things do not have an air cone, so we just need to customize them. So of course, the first thing we need to do is provide drainage holes. And I did punch a few at the bottom. You cannot really see them right now, but I'll show you how I do them. And also, I am adding extra ventilation holes. It is a pretty easy and quick process, and I'm using a cheap soldering iron to do so. However, plastic fumes are toxic, so I go on my terrace and I punch the holes there. I'm trying to be really careful not to inhale anything, so I keep my distance. So as much as possible, if you're thinking of ever doing this, be sure you are in a very well ventilated room or outside. The plastic cups are really cheap. I got 120 of them for the fabulous price of 10 euros. So if I would have purchased the orchid intended pots for the very same size, I would have paid actually a fortune, nowhere near 10 euros. More like 60 euros to be honest. There are, however, some orchids which have a pretty specific shape to them or a pretty weird pattern of growth, like the bulbophyllums, and here's where I become a little bit inventive. So what you see there is a container. I'm not even sure what it used to hold inside. It is clear plastic. The plastic is hard, is not flimsy, so it's a very good option to use as a pot. And it's a perfect pot for this bulbophyllum orchid, which has shallow roots, so I don't need depth, but spreads horizontally like a weed. Now, the pots that I am using are not all purchased. Of course, I recycle the pots that come with the orchids, specifically the Phalaenopsis pots, because other orchids don't have transparent pots. So when I repot a new orchid, I either reuse the same pot or I clean it, disinfect it, wash it very well, offer a different pot for the orchid if it is too big for the initial pot, and this I will reuse with a different orchid that is suited for its size. Transparent plastic pots give you the option to actually see how the roots are doing, or maybe decide when it's time to water your orchids based on how the medium looks like. However, since light can come through to the roots, they are also prone to developing algae, especially if you have a medium which retains a lot of water and an orchid which has to stay pretty moist almost all the time. To limit a little bit the algae phenomenon, I'm using decorative containers, which are sadly white, so light can still go through, but not in the same quantity. But decorative containers don't only have that role. I also use them to hide the pot because they just look pretty. Also, they give me the option to soak my orchids very well whenever I need to flush the medium. And also they provide a good environment for that reservoir in the summertime when I want to transform my setup into a semi-hydroponic more than anything else. So the color of my decorative containers are just a personal choice. I do really like white, and also other colors wouldn't have looked good with my brown shelving. So all of them are white or beige, pretty mute colors, nothing colorful. Being that they're white, they don't overheat, which is an important thing in my climate, which is subtropical. But as I was saying, they do let light enter a little bit, so a bit of algae will appear inside the medium as well. My decorative containers were mainly purchased at a flower shop, which from time to time has major discounts. So this, for example, I don't have the price, it used to be 75 cents. It was half price, so I purchased it at 30-something cents, which is a very good offer. Now, when I choose my decorative containers, I make sure the size will fit the orchid. And I'm interested to have a gap between the actual orchid pot and the decorative container because I do not want to suffocate the orchid roots. I still want to have air circulation around the root system. So the way that I choose my pots is based on size, and I would rather have more space in between the decorative container and the orchid pot rather than having it fit perfectly and actually suffocate the roots. The sizes of the decorative containers yet again vary, but it pretty much depends on what I find at the moment or on the market. White pots are pretty rare. Most of the times people buy colorful pots, so if you like colorful, don't worry, you have a wide variety to choose from. But if you want white, it might be a little tricky. Also, the pots that I'm using are plastic. They are purposely chosen that way because my pot is already heavy. Since I am using clay medium and also a layer of pebbles, which I will talk about in a different video, my pots tend to get quite a bit heavy. So if I would use ceramic pots, I would put a lot of stress on my shelving unit and pretty much double the weight of all of my pots, and that's not ideal. But I do have a few because I have some pretty weird looking orchid pots, such as these. Now these pots are not very tall, but they are kind of wide. These are not very common pots. I personally purchased them from Schwerter and I like them. They suit very well some orchids, but it's a bit hard to find decorative containers for them. So I had to resort to the IKEA decorative container, which is yet again very cheap. It's not white, it's beige, and it's not plastic, it's ceramic. So this is a heavy pot, much heavier than it needed to be for this orchid, I have to say, but I don't have a lot of these pots, so a few ceramic pots are okay, but generally I personally go for plastic decorative containers simply due to my medium, my clay medium. In my orchid collection from time to time, you will also see some clay pots. I'm currently in the process of transferring all of my orchids from the clay pots to plastic pots. I had some bad experiences with my particular brand of clay pots. I'll link it down below to the video in which I explain everything if you're curious. But overall, I decided that clay pots do not benefit my growing space, my growing conditions, lifestyle, orchids, and all of that. So depending when you will watch this video, you will see in my collection both plastic pots and clay pots, but at some point the clay pots will probably disappear. Now, even though I do have hanging plants, the vandas, I do not have any baskets, simply because I do have a different type of setup for the vandas. They have a textile, and that textile drips a lot. So I am actually using pots with vandas as well, but I use them as baskets. I do not put clay medium or anything else inside them other than a few pieces of that textile. And P.S. I might change it. I don't like it. I decided. Synthetic is not for me, but that's for a different video. So pots are used for vandas as well, but they do still have ventilation holes. They have the drainage holes. They're merely there because I didn't have baskets. And also baskets would allow the textile to drip way too much on the orchids below. But pretty much that's about it on the pots that I'm currently using. If I'll get any other type of pots in the future, I'll make sure to add it in the description. And recently I did a video in which I show you how I water my orchids in this setup. Remember that the series will always be in the description of my videos, and I will keep adding videos explaining my setup as I film them. Alrighty, so that's about it on the pots that I'm currently using. Thank you for suggesting this video multiple times, I might add. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't enjoy it, give it a thumbs down. Subscribe to my channel for regular orchids and plants videos. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a video. And with that said, I'll see y'all next time. Bye! So we were browsing all the series that were available, the Netflix originals and all of that. I do like Stranger Things and all of those things that people hype. I enjoy them, but they're just not for me. I'm kind of pretentious. However, there is a series available on Netflix. It's a British series actually called Line of Duty. Oh my goodness, you guys. Honestly, it's one of the best series that I've seen in years. Anyway, it's a sort of detective and investigation type of movie. It's not sci-fi, which I usually watch. I'm gonna mention the name of the movie down below in the description. Bear with it, okay? The first episode, in my personal opinion, kinda amateurish film. But then it gets better. Just watch it for the plot, for the stories. I guarantee you're gonna be blown away. It's a wonderful series. You are welcome.